Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Political Preamble live stream. If you have been living in a bunker over the past couple of days and you don't know, Twitter and Facebook actually have permanently banned the duly elected sitting president of the United States of America from their platforms. This is the official blog post from Twitter. Permanent suspension of @RealDonaldTrump. After close review of recent tweets from the @RealDonaldTrump account and the context around them, specifically how they are being received and interpreted on and off Twitter, we have permanently suspended the account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. In the context of horrific events this week, we made it clear on Wednesday that additional violations of the Twitter rules would potentially result in this very course of action. We warned you. We warned you. Our public interest framework exists to enable the public to hear from elected officials and world leaders directly. It is built on a principle that the people have a right to hold power to account in the open. However, we made it clear going back years that these accounts are not above our rules entirely and cannot use Twitter to incite violence, among other things. I assume what they're referring to here is the fact that when people had complained that there were double standards being applied, that elected officials such as Donald Trump, who had theoretically, potentially, or arguably run afoul of the rules, Twitter had decided on a course of action whereby they would label certain tweets as potentially running against their rules, violative of their rules, but they were keeping it up because it was within the public interest, which actually seemed like a reasonable response, at least as viewed from a certain standpoint. In the sense that it would be a ridiculous state of affairs for people not to be able to hear what the president had to say, whether they liked it or not. So they had this sort of public interest exception, and that I assume is what they're referring to over here. We will continue to be transparent around our policies and their enforcement. The below is a comprehensive analysis of our policy enforcement approach in this case. Well, let's take a look at the damning evidence here and see how it was that President Donald Trump incited people to violence, resulting in him being permanently banned from the platform. On January 8th, 2021, President Donald J. Trump tweeted, "The 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first, and make America great again, will have a giant voice long into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form." So this is the tweet here that they're referring to. Not looking like a very strong argument so far. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. This is why Twitter have decided to remove the duly elected sitting president of the United States of America from their platform. Shortly thereafter, it gets worse. Shortly thereafter, the president tweeted to all those who have asked, "I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. Okay? Due to the ongoing tensions in the United States and an uptick in the global conversation in regards to the people who violently stormed the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, these two tweets must be read in the context of broader events in the country and the ways in which the president's statements can be mobilized by different audiences, including to incite violence, as well as in the context of the pattern of behavior from this account in recent weeks. After assessing the language in these tweets against our glorification of violence policy, we have determined that these tweets are in violation of the glorification of violence policy, and the user @RealDonaldTrump should be immediately permanently suspended from the service. And it goes on. And this is really a ridiculous analysis here. Here it is. This determination is based on a number of factors, including, yes, I know that Apple removed Parler from the App Store, or at least the last I heard that their executive team had sent a notice or warning to Parler saying that unless they came up with a plan for content moderation that they would be removed. Yeah, this is big tech, the technocracy coming down like a ton of bricks and wielding their considerable power to essentially subvert American democracy. That is what is happening here. Apple should do what it does best, which is go back to making shiny phones with corners, produced by child labor and sweatshops in China and spare us their self-appointed moral authority. Really just incredible. But yeah, that's exactly right. Twitter is adding in context that is not there. You see, we do have an exception in the First Amendment in free speech, at least arguably, which is that if there's a clear and present danger, there's incitement to violence, that speech is theoretically not protected. It's worth noting that some free speech absolutists believe that there shouldn't even be that exception, that only the actors should be responsible for what they do, and it doesn't, any words that you say, even if you are directly encouraging someone to act with violence, that speech should still be protected. But okay, I can live with the idea that there is an exception, that no rights are absolute, that incitement to violence is not protected speech, but that's not what this is. This is a massive rally in Washington, D.C., held by Trump and many of his supporters who showed up. They have a right to advocate. They have a right to argue. They have a right to rally. They have a right to do whatever they want, whether you agree or disagree with their contention that the election was stolen, that it was rigged, that there was massive fraud that resulted in Biden being elected. And so a small group of people there did engage in acts that should be condemned. And Donald Trump is not responsible for that. In fact, at this point, you actually need to go to the archive of his tweets to even be able to see the things that he had said, since his account is now permanently suspended. I have it here using archive.vn. Here's a tweet, for example. Maybe blow this up so we can see it a little bit better. I'm asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. So apparently that context doesn't seem to matter. Apparently that context is just stripped out. But even without this context, the whatever exception could arguably be carved out as far as speech that does not fall under that kind of protection of the First Amendment, we need to be extremely narrow. But of course, all of this is moot, and this relates to a video that I made recently, in that everyone is shrieking on Twitter that Twitter has a right to do whatever they want. They have their terms of service, they have their rules, they're a private enterprise, and they can do whatever they want. Now, this happens to be the dumbest argument that I've ever heard, because simply noting the fact, and you should go back and watch that video because I went on a 25-minute rant on this topic, simply stating the fact that Twitter has the legal right to do it doesn't mean that it is good, doesn't mean that it is just, and it doesn't negate the fact that Twitter and the other companies that make up the tech monopoly, or technocracy, if you will, are acting in a way that is completely inimical to the interests of the people of the United States. There's a reason. The reason we have the First Amendment is because we recognize how foundational it is in a liberal democracy to be able to have a marketplace of ideas, right? We need to be able to have the mind reign supreme above anything else, not coercion, not force. All ideas need to be heard so that we can engage in civil discourse, and we can decide which ideas we want to discard, which ideas we want to promote. And it's all based on the assumption, and it is an assumption, by the way, which I think does hold true. But without this assumption, the whole logic of it falls apart, which is basically that ultimately, or most people will have the correct ideas. That through this process of sifting out the bad ideas that inevitably make their way into public dialogue, we can arrive at the ideas that are good and true. But in order for that to work, there can't be a limitation on speech. There simply can't be. We cannot have private companies taking considerable advantage of the laws, the legal fictions with regards to how they operate as an enterprise, as a corporation in the United States. We cannot have them acting in this way where what we have essentially is a situation where the public square is owned by a private company. That's a problem. That's a problem if they are going to essentially exercise their own discretion as to who may or may not engage in public dialogue. And this would matter for any sitting politician, elected official. It obviously matters even more, just as an aside, for Donald Trump. He said back, I think, in 2017 that he never would have won without Twitter, because he enraged the media because he was able to completely circumvent them by just going and speaking directly to the people. He had a huge megaphone with his, whatever it was, 70, 80 million followers. He was able to speak directly to the American people through Twitter, and he simply did not need, Twitter and other such networks are an extremely democratizing force in the sense that you don't need the permission of the big networks anymore. You don't need huge startup costs or anything to create your own kind of communication platform or pay for TV time, any of that. You don't need any of that. You can just go directly on Twitter and reach the people directly. And of course, people who are not interested in winning, either in the general marketplace of ideas or in the electoral process, through having better ideas, more compelling arguments, their interest is to silence anyone who gets in their way. And again, it would be one thing if there was a very narrowly tailored definition of what incitement to violence is, and that has to be an extremely high standard. Okay? If Donald Trump is responsible for the people that, quote unquote, stormed the Capitol, well, then Barack Obama is responsible for the people that shot, the Black Lives Matter people that shot police officers. Then Bernie Sanders is responsible for his supporter who went and shot a senator who nearly died. But of course they're not, because they never told anyone to go and engage in acts of violence. You can find their speech reprehensible. You can say they didn't do anyone any good, that they raised the temperature, that they acted irresponsibly. I don't care. You can say the same thing about Donald Trump in this situation. Even if I agree with that, the idea that the duly elected president of the United States, who's still in the midst of his term, albeit it ends on the 20th, that he would be removed from Facebook and Twitter because these companies have decided that to expand the definition of incitement, to expand the definition of harm, where do we think this is leading? We know where this goes. We know where this goes, and it's one step closer to hell. So as I said in the beginning of the stream, we really are at a flashpoint, a civilizational flashpoint here, where the biggest threat that we have now to our democracy is honestly, it's a coup being staged by billion-dollar corporations. They are the biggest threat that America faces today. It cannot be overstated the importance and just how fundamental the ability to engage in speech is. I mentioned in the description, I think in one of my recent videos, that if you haven't yet had a chance to read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, you really should do it. Going through that essay, or book, whatever you want to call it, it's technically an essay. It is one of the most compelling arguments ever put forward in defense of free speech, analyzed at such a level of logic and rationality that it simply leaves the reader utterly convinced of the correctness of the views that he promulgates in that book. And going through that book, honestly, by the end of it, you will have a better understanding of just how important free speech is if we are to have a liberal democracy. If we don't want to have a liberal democracy, then sure, we can throw out the whole idea. And that seems to be what we're doing here. But if we do want to have a liberal democracy, freedom of speech, defended and guarded as jealously as possible is absolutely crucial. Had a few more things I wanted to go through here. Take a look at this this video. Sarah Gonzalez tweeted out, since Twitter's banning lawmakers for inciting violence, when will they be banning Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, Simone Sanders, Joe Biden, and literally everyone else in this video? Let's take a look.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the street.
I don't know what the volume is like on this video for you guys in the stream. Let me know in the chat if you're able to see this okay. I think I may need to actually move this over slightly.
For as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick them.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I just don't even.
So there you have it. The obvious point of this video is to point out the double standard. The media has stopped even pretending to be objective journalists or fact finders. For months, we had Black Lives Matter and Antifa setting cities all across the country ablaze. And what was the response to this? The response to this was, well, maybe it's not so great, but if we want to stop this, we need to listen. That's what we're going to have to do to stop the violence. We need to listen to what their complaints are. We need to try to understand. Riots and looting are apparently the language of the unheard. Of course, that's only half of the perspective of Martin Luther King Jr., but these people are morons and they don't know anything about what the guy said. And why? As an aside, why even pretend to hold MLK up as any sort of authority when the entire left wing has completely abandoned his principles? I mean, they literally make fun of people who advocate for colorblindness, right? Critical race theory is openly opposed to the idea of colorblindness. So it's an amazing thing that they would try to latch onto the legacy of MLK as if their ideas have anything to do with his. But anyways, yeah, there was literally this was great. There was a journalist who he had two. These are two of his headlines. This guy, German Lopez, What a fitting first name, sorry to say. Riots are destructive, dangerous, and scary, but can lead to serious social reforms. To prevent more violent uprisings and protests, we need to take their causes seriously. Right, so when Black Lives Matter takes to the streets and engages in violence, when they are allowed to attack the federal building in Portland night after night after night, when they are allowed free reign to set up the Chaz, the autonomous zone in Seattle, for weeks on end, months maybe, I don't remember, someone can remind me in the chat. That's simply because we need to hear them out. We need to listen to them. And then what does he say after the protests in D.C.? Every person who forced their way into the Capitol should be arrested. Lock them all up. The cognitive dissonance that is required to hold these two ideas in your mind at the same time is simply unbelievable. And I should state that I'm not condoning what these people did in D.C. whatsoever. But the media and the Democratic establishment have absolutely been cheerleaders for violence for months on end. For months on end, they have openly, not just winked and nodded at it, they have called for it because they were using them as useful idiots to promote their political causes. So there's no principles whatsoever. None whatsoever. It's simply when it's not a principled stance that political violence is unacceptable regardless of whatever political persuasion you're coming from. No, it's people that I don't like who support causes that I disagree with, their violence is unacceptable. But anyone else who engages in violence, if I agree with their political causes, then the violence is perfectly acceptable. I mean, just look at this. How can this guy take himself seriously? So that's the state of affairs right now. We have a technocracy that has decided to, and we knew this was happening. This was just a matter of time, right? Twitter was just waiting. I think in all likelihood that if Trump were now to be entering a second term, they wouldn't be doing this. I mean, you guys can tell me what you think in the chat, but I think that they really are under pressure in some ways. Of course, they have their own kind of self-initiated sense of superiority. Clearly, power has gone to Jack Dorsey's head, but I think that they fear the incoming administration, and they're talking amongst themselves about what they need to do. And they see they see Donald Trump in the waning days of his presidency, and now Beijing Biden and Kamala Harris coming into office, and the Senate now controlled by Democrats, so they control. They basically control the entire government. You can, I guess, put aside the judiciary, the Supreme Court, but they basically have a stranglehold on the levers of government, and so they're fearing for their own skin, and so they're doing what they think that they need to do. Michael Tracy on Twitter, I think, put this pretty well. He said, "The new corporate authoritarian liberal left monoculture is going to be absolutely ruthless, and in 12 days it is merging with the state. This is only the beginning." That's the problem that we have. We have a media and big tech that has essentially become another wing of the Democratic Party. They are 100% completely in bed with them. They do their bidding. There's no pushback whatsoever. They are themselves the ones that are driving forward the far left woke agenda. And you can see it all over Twitter and all throughout public conversation. The fools who are celebrating this action taken by Twitter of permanently banning Trump from the platform, they really just have no sense of the slippery slope here. They don't realize the very people who are cheering it on, their positions, whether they be moderate, centrist, whatever they are, these companies will expand the definition of harm to include very sort of milquetoast beliefs that they have, and they too will be removed from public conversation. And of course, the other thing that is part of the equation of free speech is that, it's sort of this cliche that sunlight is the best disinfectant. and that the only answer to bad speech is more speech. And that is absolutely true. Again, see John Stuart Mill in On Liberty. What do they think is going to happen now? Now, Apple's going to make an effort, and Google already has. I guess Apple has too. Someone mentioned in the chat, coming down on Parler because of their lack of content moderation. So, but people are still going to be able to get there. They can get the app on their phone, especially Android and Apple if they go through the trouble of jailbreaking or whatever it is. But they'll get the app, and now what? So now, if you really think that these are all extremists, well, now you've just removed any possibility that they could ever be reformed, right? Because now you've just exacerbated the echo chambers that exist. They are accelerating the complete breakup along the cultural divide of the right and the left, whatever you want to call it, in this country, by ensuring that people who have certain views congregate in one place and people who have other views congregate in another. Now, I don't say this to imply that it's as if, every day on Twitter there's some kind of graceful public conversation going on. There's a lot of bullshit that goes on there, obviously. It's a cancerous place in many ways. But there absolutely are cases where people have radical ideas, and they are de-radicalized through the process of engaging in dialogue and engaging in the marketplace of ideas. No chance of that happening now, because the left and big tech do not care about the health of our democracy. It's all grandstanding. This idea that they are somehow heroes who are helping to heal our democracy, it's a joke. They don't care about the health of the republic, or if they do, they are simply low information, low IQ people who don't know anything about history and have not, again, read things like John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. They have no idea what the consequences of this are. And I think that they're not thinking about it. They have power, and it is simply too alluring to them to forego the opportunity to use the big hammer that they have, and that is what they've decided to do. Related to this, James Lindsay, who's great. He's a guy with a strong academic background, originally a mathematician. If you haven't gone to his site, newdiscourses.org, I think it is, you should. He is the one who has basically made it his life's mission to expose all of these sort of crazy philosophies, I guess you want to call it, ideologies such as critical race theory, different sort of offshoots of postmodernism. He's really one of the only people who understands it extremely well, because the stuff is complex, and he is able to explain it in very simple terms, and he can trace the sort of intellectual lineage of all of it. They have a YouTube channel as well, New Discourses, also very good. Highly recommend it, and recommend supporting him if you're able to, and if you're so inclined. But excuse me, he says here, we are witnessing the birth of a new cultural national mythology. The New World Order will be based upon the myth that the Democratic Party narrowly stopped a Nazi coup of the United States by Trump and his violent insurrectionists to keep us on the right side of history. And that, I think, is exactly right. That is exactly what's going on here. They view themselves as some sort of saviors of the democracy. They think that what went on was some sort of attempt at a fascistic takeover of the United States government. And again, I feel the need to restate yet again that I don't support what happened in DC, but to pretend that this is anything other than big tech becoming drunk on their own power and using it to subvert American democracy, you're kidding yourself. You're absolutely fooling yourself. And that's sort of cliche. First they came for this guy and I didn't say anything because I wasn't that. Then they came for this guy. And then finally they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. That's the problem here. That is why you need to have a principled stance. I mentioned in my other video, there was a famous case of this black woman who I think was on the board of the public radio channel in some place where the KKK had been organizing a rally. and they were going to be advertising it or announcing it on their show. And she was one of the only people who supported the right to do it, even though their speech was completely deplorable, and it is, and it serves no benefit actually to public dialogue. But she understood, right? See, that's what people don't understand. It's not as if there isn't speech that is harmful. There is speech that is harmful. No, speech is not violence, as the left likes to say. Speech is not violence. Violence is violence. Speech is speech. But there is speech that can be so belittling of people, so just dehumanizing of other people, that it actually undercuts the very goals of having more ideas in the marketplace of ideas, because it shuts people out, because it's just so reprehensible, right? So we can clearly identify certain cases where speech is harmful. The problem is, though, who is going to make the rules of deciding what and when speech is harmful? Who do we leave that up to? And that is an incalculably difficult problem to solve. And so, as Jordan Peterson once said, we don't have perfect solutions. We have solutions that leave us in a situation where we are less abjectly miserable than we otherwise would be. And we're now entering that situation where we're in an abjectly miserable situation, because who is going to decide what is harm? Who is going to decide what speech is hate speech, for example? Well, the answer is that over any reasonable period of time, it's exactly the people who you would least want to be defining it. Silicon Valley right now has decided they are taking on the role, because since they control the channels of communication, they've decided that they are the ones who are in the position to decide what is and isn't hate speech. I'll refer you to an example. No, I read the chats. I'm just in the middle of making a point here. Disagree with your previous video on Trump's ban. Went ahead and left a comment. Okay, thank you for leaving a comment. I will get to it if I haven't seen it yet. You think I'm kidding myself. This is just a forum. There is no threat of force for if you speak out. You are just banned from one small corner of the internet, which already happens. Yeah, that I think is absolutely foolish. This is a line that you happen to be aligned with what the tech companies themselves say. You'll always notice that, you know, when they're on their road show and they're trying to raise money, they talk about how they're the biggest company and no one can compete with them. But whenever they sit in front of Congress, they always want to downplay. This is a point that the famed investor, what's his name, Peter Thiel has said, is that they'll always downplay their monopoly when they're sitting in front of Congress because they're afraid of, you know, anti-monopoly laws coming down on them. But this is absolutely silly. This idea that, well, you can just go somewhere else. Yeah, but the reality is that right now Twitter is one of the biggest platforms. Twitter has become synonymous with the public square. So this idea that, well, because you could go somewhere else, how does that make it okay? How does it make it okay on principle, the fact that you could go somewhere else? So therefore what? Therefore Twitter is in the position of being able to remove the president from the United States of America from their platform, a place where he broadcasts to 80 million people. I don't understand the argument. I've read. Oh yeah, that's a comment from someone else. Disagree with hate speech, but that is not what is happening with big tech. So then, what's happening? What's happening with big tech? Have you read Twitter's blog post explaining why they are banning Donald Trump? And again, this is the problem: is that I think that you truly don't understand the slippery slope that we're dealing with here. Is that, you see, you may like and you may condone or support this particular action, but is it blind faith that you have that they're going to continue to do the right thing? That the people who are in control of Twitter are always going to align with your interests? It's like the same idea with politicians and who the president is. If you expand the powers of the president during a time when the person who holds the seat of power happens to align with your policies, you don't think there's going to come a time when the person who holds the seat is someone you don't like? Throughout your lifetime, there's always going to be presidents who you support and presidents who you don't like. So even a president who you do support, you should want to hold power to account and make sure that their powers stay as limited as possible within the confines of the Constitution, because that's the only thing protecting us from when someone gets in who is not wise and virtuous comes in there. That was the whole idea of the Constitution, that they had to codify it into law because the framers saw themselves as wise and virtuous people and understood that in the future, not everyone, there's no guarantee that people in the future would be as wise and virtuous as they are. So, okay, so you agree with Twitter's ban over here. Firstly, because you have some sort of excuse that, well, they can go somewhere else. Again, explain to me how that makes them doing it on principle something that is in line with the interests of the United States, given how foundational the ability to engage in speech is, even speech that you don't like and you disagree with. Show me where Trump specifically called for violence or criminal behavior. On the contrary, he openly said people need to remain peaceful, no violence. Did he not say that? So again, you might agree with the way that it shakes out here in this particular situation, but you're kidding yourself if you think that this is not Twitter using considerable discretion and looking at this sort of vague context and making a judgment call to decide that this is contributing to this environment. And even if I agree with you, let's say I even agree with you. Let's say that I even agree with you that, yeah, this is probably raising the temperature more than turning down the heat on the situation. That is not enough to remove and ban the sitting president of the United States of America from the platform. And I'm not talking about whether they legally have the ability to do it. I really couldn't give a shit whether they legally have the ability to do it. So if they legally have the ability to do it, then we obviously need some new sort of digital Bill of Rights. We need some sort of law that says that when you become so big that you are effectively one of the main ways that you can engage in the national conversation and public dialogue, and perhaps even special treatment for people who are politicians, right? That was originally Twitter's idea, was that even things that run afoul of our rules, what kind of world are we going to live in where people can't hear what the president is thinking? Doesn't that put us in a safer position to see the late night musings of the president, as crazy as he may be? That is a better situation for democracy, not throwing it out of there. And now what do you think is going to happen? This is only going to further radicalize people, because it's a bad look, for one, because it looks like you are unable to engage on the merits. You're not able to debunk and disassemble or destroy the opponent's ideas on the merits. Instead, you're just winning because you've removed the guy by force. Okay, so now everyone sees that, and they will be further radicalized. They will be pushed to Gab and Parler and other places where they don't come in contact with any of your ideas, because apparently you don't have the faith that the merit of your ideas is enough to convince people to come to your side of the ideological fence. Yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to. I think that the framers had, someone mentioned in the comment, science, not sure how to pronounce your name. Yes, we need some sort of digital civil rights, because the framers foresaw a lot, and the system that they set up in the 1700s is remarkably durable. And I would be very, very careful about, messing with that system. At the same time, they did not foresee everything. They lived in a certain time, in a certain context. The principles still apply, very much so. They had a deep understanding of history. They saw time and time again the way that governments devolve into tyranny. They saw government correctly as the biggest threat to individual liberties. But we live in a different time now. We have a problem where, again, we have the public square is owned by private corporations. And for them to have rules about to go above and beyond, and to say that certain type of speech which would be protected under the First Amendment is now going to be systematically removed from their platform, that's a problem. I don't care that right now the situation in the legal system is such that they have the ability to do it. Then we need to change the laws. Then we need to have special treatment for companies that reach this size, where they practically the removal of someone from their platform is practically silencing them, is practically removing their ability to engage in civil discourse. That they should not be able to do that. They shouldn't be able to do it. I don't want to live in a country where corporations are allowed to take advantage of the considerable infrastructure of this country, and yet they are going against the social contract that we have all agreed to abide by, which is made up of certain things enshrined in the Bill of Rights, themselves based on certain foundational principles that are so foundational they aren't even in the law. They are premises of the law. Again, I mentioned in my video the other day that one of the founders, I don't know if it was Benjamin Franklin, whoever it was, he said that, you know, the Constitution has nothing to say about an immoral people. If people are not seeking the good, right? If they are not interested in the well-being of other people, the Constitution has nothing to say about that. You cannot legislate perfection. The law is a specific formulation which only very loosely is aimed at a certain, whatever we've defined as the good. But it's possible to be completely corrupt and completely evil within the confines of the law. Exactly. If speech and ideas upset you, must convince them of better speech and better ideas. And that is, you see, that is a faith that a person has to have. And it's not a blind faith. We've seen it, that ultimately the good and true ideas, you have to have a certain conviction that ultimately the mind, argumentation, and debate will win over. And it's something, by the way, I've thought about a lot. You'll see it time and time again where, you know, I think the most courageous people are the ones who say things in the public square, even in the face of ridicule, in the face of personal consequences to their life, their livelihood, and family. And you will see so many times they become vindicated. Look at the civil rights movement in this country. That was, you know, look at the abolition of slavery. Again, just two simple examples where in their day they were seen as you know, probably insurrectionists and people who were going against the country and whatever else it was. But they won. And they won without violence. They won without coercion, because that's the only lasting change that can be made, is if you convince people of the correctness of your position. If you were Adolf Hitler and you said it in a public address, I will accompany you. It looks like your messages are coming in a little out of order, Bruce, but it's literally just a marching on Jewish business in protest, and then his followers marched on them and burned them down. Then he tweets, "These are the things that happen when Jews invaded the tradition movement." Well, okay, but how is that equivalent to what Trump did, though? There's no threat of the use of force. You're still free to say whatever you want. Just take it elsewhere. But if we run that thought experiment, if every company did it, then are you free to say whatever you want? It sounds like you're just living in this abstract world. Well, I think he's distinguishing between, he's saying government ultimately is backed by a threat of force, which is true. They have the monopoly on violence. Okay, and Twitter doesn't. Therefore, what? But again, I think that you're thinking too abstractly, because well, what happens if all the companies do it then? So then it becomes a problem. Like practically, you're now limited in your ability to engage in dialogue. Now, if people smear you, for example, or they make false accusations, you're not even there to defend yourself. Like, what are you saying? You're saying the correctness of it depends on the fact that there's another platform that they could do it. And what about the situation of Donald Trump? Snapchat gone, TikTok gone, Facebook gone, Twitter gone, YouTube gone, whatever it is, removed from all the platforms. So now the ability of Twitter or any individual company doing it, now that changes and it reverses course. Like Twitter, to the correctness of Twitter's action depends on the fact that he's able to do it somewhere else. How does that make any sense? And then if he's not able to, then what they did is wrong. That just logically doesn't make any sense. Not every company in the world. Just think practically. It doesn't matter if there's one little teeny tiny platform where you're still able to speak. Is that really what you're arguing? That as long as there's a single platform where you can still send out something that someone else in the world could see, then therefore you're not acting against the interests or the principles of the country, which values the ability to engage in dialogue, even with ideas that you find reprehensible and disagree with. As long as you can find a single company, then it's okay. How can that possibly be a tenable situation? I really don't understand that. That just that doesn't make sense to me. That just doesn't make sense to me. You have practically, you have to acknowledge the facts on the ground, which is that certain companies are just more important than others. If you're removed from certain platforms, right, they're not all equal. If you're removed from Parler, that's a lot less of an issue than if you're removed from Twitter, for example. Twitter simply has become synonymous with the public square, whether they like it or not. That is the reality. And so now, whatever and it doesn't even matter if you still have the ability somewhere else. But the fact is that your ability has been greatly hampered at this point. I feel like we're going in circles on this point. Government can take away freedom of speech by use of force. Well, why should that be the operating principle? Where do you see that the ideals that undergird why freedom of speech is so important, why it was enshrined in the First Amendment? Forget the laws, forget the particular laws and the fact that I'll agree that the First Amendment technically only applies to restrict the government's ability to curb speech. That's fine. We all agree with that. I agree they have the ability to do it. They do have the ability to do it. And I'm arguing that that's a problem, that it's simply an untenable situation to allow these companies to do it. Because you know what's going to happen tomorrow? Twitter, for example, has a rule against misgendering someone. So that means that their rules are by definition ideological. Because half the country thinks that misgendering means when you call someone who was born a male, female, and vice versa. But they feel that if you refer to someone as he or she and they identify as the other sex, that is considered harm now. Do you think that what's more likely to happen? That their definition of harm is going to become smaller over time or become expanded? Their definition is going to become expanded over time as their ideology becomes more and more extreme, to the point where even the very things that you're saying right now in this chat, you'll be able to be expelled from the platform for saying some of those things. It's really not hard to see how this creates a snowball effect, whereby companies who hold the keys to the pipes, basically the public pipes, the channels in which people speak, they're going to be able to basically silence whoever they want. And that's what's happened here. It has nothing to do with whether you agree in this particular case with Twitter's decision. The problem is that it is this very blog post that I have opened over here, where Twitter explains their decision. It is based on such a particular reading of the events and a judgment call that is so up to Twitter's discretion. It is simply the way Sargon titled his video recently on his Akkad Daily channel. I thought was good, is that it's a vulgar display of power. That's what it is. It's absolutely vulgar for a company operating in the United States to remove from their platform permanently the sitting president of the United States. I mean, it's just nuts. The alternative is the government stepping in and restricting private companies' ability to expel speech that could lead to deaths of a large amount of people. Yeah, I'm not, by the way, saying some people do have this position. Again, there are there are free speech absolutists, and there are arguments to support their position. But I don't even need to take that position, right? There are some people who would say that you can say anything you want. You can say anything you want, up to and including incitement to violence. But I'm willing to accept a limitation, very narrowly defined, that would say if you tell someone to go and kill someone else, that's a problem. Again, some free speech absolutists would say that that's your problem. That's your problem. You're the actor there. You have free will. You're the one who makes the decision. But I could understand it, especially in the case of crowds. There is a sort of madness of crowds phenomenon. There's a group psychology. Freud has discussed it. You can have situations where you can whip people up into a frenzy, and it's so likely to cause imminent danger. And there's a clear and present danger, as the Supreme Court put it, the standard, that you could argue that in certain cases, right? Because there are, as I think Scalia has mentioned in many of his decisions, every right is limited to some degree. There are no absolute rights, right? Even speech, which we guard so jealously, can be restricted in certain instances. I have no problem with that, and I'm not arguing against that. But that has very little bearing on the issue at hand, which is what we're seeing here is a coordinated effort by big tech companies in Silicon Valley with a very particular view, who are clearly partisan, who are in bed with the Democratic Party, who have decided that they want to remove speech that they don't like. And it's not going to stop here. You know, in some ways, I hate to say it, I'm almost happy that this happened, because they put all their cards on the table. This is what they've wanted to do, and they've finally done it. But it's not a good situation. I'm not happy about the situation, the outcome, the condition that we find ourselves in this country. There's absolutely no chance of healing the divide, the deep kind of culture wars and philosophical, ideological divisions that exist in this country. There's absolutely zero chance that this will lead to a resolution of those issues. We have deep, deep problems in this country where there's barely anything that we still hold in common. From the standpoint of culture, even the institutions are beginning to crumble. And that's what we have now. We now have a media that is in bed with the Democratic Party. Just look at this past election. Look at how they refuse to report on basic things in order to educate and inform the citizens of this country about a decision as important as who should be the next president. They let Biden sit in the basement. They censored the New York Post's reporting on Biden's laptop situation, and to say that that this is somehow an okay situation because the laws just so happen to be right now that they legally have the ability to do it, that's somehow a good situation. That's a terrible situation. And I would say this regardless of who the president was and whether I supported their positions, whether they were on the opposite side of my own partisan beliefs. It's an absolute shit show. This is how we end up in a situation where people are radicalized, where companies with a very specific ideological bent will be able to control the public dialogue. And everything is based on dialogue. All of the body politic is based on dialogue. Our election system is based on dialogue. Everything is based on being able to engage in the marketplace of ideas. And now they will. Have you ever noticed also that that when they remove someone, there's always a larger purge that goes on. We're starting to see channels be demonetized, removed from YouTube. If you're paying close attention, you'll see this happening. Anyone on YouTube who's in any way remotely heterodox is fearful that they will be removed from the platform for no good reason. They now have to scramble to set up accounts on Rumble and BitChute and Odyssey and all these other places because they know what's coming. The tech companies have been allowed to run amok without any consequences whatsoever. And with the impending change in our government, moving decidedly Democrat, to have them be in bed with the Democratic Party, it's now they're going to wield even more power, and it's going to come down like a ton of bricks. You're going to see. Everything's going to move very, very swiftly now. This has just opened up the floodgates, and it's a problem that we are going to have to deal with. And I'm really sick of seeing people like Dan Crenshaw and others, grandstand about all this and tweet about it and post on Instagram. Enough. Why are you talking about this now? You had the ability over the last 4 years when the Republicans controlled Congress and they had a majority in the Senate, whatever it was. You had the ability to address this. This is a major threat to American democracy, and you did nothing. I don't need your fucking tweets. I don't need your little posts on Instagram telling me how this is a bad situation. I know it's a bad situation. We've been beating the drum on this thing. If you've been paying any attention, the citizens of this country have been beating the drum on this for a very, very long time. It's part of the reason why Donald Trump won, because he was right, and he basically rang true to people that the enemy of the people is the media and the big tech companies, and they were sick of it. They were sick of being marginalized by these companies and by the media, and their ability to do it is only growing every day. And now as you're heading into being the minority and losing considerable power in the legislature, you're now tweeting about what a bad situation it is. You should have done something about it when you had the chance. Anyways, I did really have a hard stop at 10 o'clock. Bruce, I will follow up with your comments. You had a lot to say there. It's hard to follow it all while the stream is going on, but I do want to pick up the conversation. I think there is something meaningful there to discuss. I think we probably disagree, but I'm open to hearing what you have to say. That's the beauty of free speech and being able to engage in conversation and dialogue with people who you may disagree with, because I may, find that my ideas need to be more nuanced and I need to refine them, and you may find the same thing, or we may end up just in the same position, or we swap positions. Who knows what could happen? But we know that me and you are both going to be better off by engaging in dialogue, and for force and fiat to have any place in that would just be an absolute absurdity. I mean, imagine that I'm not able to express my opinions, or vice versa. There's absolutely no chance that we end up with a better conception of reality. Everyone should want to have their model of the world actually be in accordance with the reality. But now that's not going to happen, because the echo chambers have now just been amplified. Everyone on Twitter who is clapping this action by Twitter, they have no idea what's coming. They have no idea what's coming, and they don't value in any way the ability to actually have your ideas be challenged and to engage in the very process by which we try to arrive at the truth through dialogue and through conversation. So yeah, like I said, I did have a hard stop at 10 o'clock, but thank you all very much for joining and participating, and I hope we can do many of these again in the future. That's it for now. Have a great night, everyone.